Like Joseph Campbell said, where there is a way or path, it is someone else's path. So this is the work of all of us as individuals, and he did that work, living the truth that it is our right, our privilege, and our responsibility to participate in change. He would often say, sort of bemusedly, people are funny. And it's true, we are. Endlessly, tragically, wonderfully funny. Worth keen attention. Thank goodness we get to be here seeing each other do it all. Drawing, learning from each other. Thank goodness he was there for part of it, drawing us out in the way that he did. There's no world that exists for any of us outside of a world that held him in it for a time. Thank goodness. Thank you all.
I'm also going to use my notes. Among Snake's many talents, he was an incredible grandpa. He and Alexis cared for both kids 1 day a week, beginning when Oscar was just 3 months old, and they continued caring for Elliot right up until he started treatment last year. Above all, Grandpa Snake was silly. He loved a good prank and often involved Oscar and Elliot in his schemes. One time, an enormous bag of stuffed bananas showed up in his garage, and Oscar got to take them home. We still have them. Another time, pirates buried some treasure in Snake's yard for Oscar to discover. Yet another time, when Oscar left some Ninja Turtles at Snake's, he documented their trek back to our house, much to Oscar's delight. Grandpa Snake filled the kids' days with adventure and a sense of magic.
Me and my grandpa loved to walk around the neighborhood with Henry, throwing rocks and sticks in the river and watching traffic at the Big Bridge. What's the actual name for it? Big Bridge. Okay. We also loved putting coins on the train track to flatten them. It never worked. Whenever Elliot and Snake heard the train whistle blow, they'd rush out the door and wave at the train. Elliot also loved being pushed by Grandpa on the handmade swing he hung in the yard. And inspecting how the gardens were growing. Elliot doesn't want us to forget to share that Grandpa was really funny. Snake was also, as you may know, a very accomplished napper. He was always game. I can't see there. He was always game for a snuggle and sleep on the couch with us. Even after we had outgrown naps at Grandpa's, Grandpa never misses afternoon nap, giving us time to sneak candy and screen time with Grandma Lexi.
Grandpa Snake gave our kids make-believe and free play and spending time outdoors and making art and so many other sweet experiences. We're so grateful our kids got the time to get to know their grandpa in such a special way. Our kids loved him so and knew that they were loved by him in return. Thank you. That's it.
Aye, aye, aye. Good job, Oscar. I also am not a speaker that knows how to speak impromptu, so I have it here. If I can find page 1. There we go. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Hintermeister. Louder? One in the back says otherwise, so. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Hintermeister, and I was blessed to be his best friend. At least I called myself his best friend. Maybe many of you did as well. But I feel honored to share some stories today about that friendship during this celebration. I met Snake in 1992 at a New Warrior training adventure. And our friendship grew slowly at first, but it took a deeper dive in '96 when he had some relationship issues with a hot-tempered Swiss woman. And without going into any details, Snake ended up sleeping in my basement for a week, and I took the week off and we hung out. One day we went to see the movie Star Trek First Contact, and we heard the board say the words, "Resistance is futile." And I can't tell you how many times over the years we put that to each other as we thought we were holding back. And with Snake, there wasn't any resistance. It was futile. Snake had a passion for men's work, obviously, and we traveled together to attend countless men's gatherings in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, as well as Colorado and California. And in '99, we spent 2 weeks in Cape Town, South Africa, where we were working to fire up the men's community there. Snake also worked in the with the men inside Folsom Prison, and I was blessed to go inside with him 2 different times. In 2001, I left Minnesota and I split my time between Mexico and Colorado. Snake came to visit me in Colorado a couple of times, once with a dear friend, Bill Elbring, and the other, Alexis, came. We stayed in contact as best we could, and there were several summers when I came back to visit, and I stayed here with Snake and Alexis. Late in 2009, when Snake first had his cancer, I came and cared for him for a couple of weeks. And he seemed ready to surrender, but fortunately for all of us, he chose to live. And as he was healing, he worked hard to rewire his brain. The experience had changed him, and he wanted to grow from it. I know many of you have heard him ask these questions. What did you learn from your experience, and how is it going to benefit you and our community? That came out of that first round of chemo. When I moved back to Minnesota 10 years ago, Snake and Alexis invited me to live here with them, and I stayed for 1.5 years. It was time to go. Snake and I were both early risers, so we were up at 5 o'clock having coffee here in the yard or in the garage, and we were solving the world's problems, of course. But after I moved out, we continued to stay in touch at 5 and 6 in the morning with texts and phone calls, and sometimes to dump issues that were happening on one side or the other, but more often than not it was just to check in, and there wasn't really anything we needed to say. In 2015, when my mom died, Snake rode with me down to her memorial and met my family. We spent the afternoon with them, and he became a part of my family, just as I was a part of his family. And if we were both in town on Friday, you'd find us over in St. Paul at the pizza lunch at the Italian pie shop. We'd spend 30 minutes driving there and 30 minutes back. And those weekly trips were a mainstay for us over the years. We were brothers, and we grew up together, and we matured as men together. 20 years ago, when we were still young in our early 50s, we facilitated a workshop in that summer house there. and it was about how to be an elder in our society. We were trying to figure it out because we were both searching for the best version of who we might become, and we pushed each other whenever one of us was selling ourselves short. Snake was better at digging into my stuff than I was into his. But I learned from the master, and I turned it on him more than once. And he had a couple of words he'd say to me in that moment, and I wasn't going to say it. Don't need to say it. It's already been said somewhere. Anyway, after Snake died, I started thinking about who I had just spent 31 years with. He was a truly incredible man and seemed larger than life, really, the more I thought of the memories. But there was another thing that I realized about how I had been living in his shadow in a strange sort of way. Whenever we went somewhere, Snake was in charge, usually. Snake did all the talking, and I was his sidekick, and I didn't have to say anything unless I wanted to. I began to wonder, who am I now that he is gone? Who am I without Snake in my life? I began to feel that I needed to grow up a little bit. And perhaps all of us need to expand a little bit to fill the space that Snake had left. We were all given the gift of having had him in our lives, and I know we all grew from our experiences just sitting with him and listening to his stories and hearing him talk. Carlos Castaneda wrote, the basic difference between an ordinary man and a warrior is that the warrior takes everything as a challenge, whereas the ordinary man takes everything as a blessing or a curse. Snake was a warrior and so much more. We challenged each other to become better human beings, and I'm pretty sure he did that with each and every one of you out there. He sure liked to talk and tell his stories. And I heard some of them way too many times. But he was also a good listener, and he modeled perfectly how to be present with others. And he loved holding a vision of who you might become. I have one more thing I want to say about his years with Snake, 31 years. Through all the years in our travels, in our times together, we never, ever once had an argument. And it wasn't because we were playing nice. We were honest and we held each other accountable. But it's truly amazing, 31 years. I will miss his support and encouragement. I will miss growing old together, and I'll always be wondering what he'd say next, or what he'd do next. I'll miss the sense of adventure we had and the places we might have gone to. I'll miss my brother and best friend every day.
Thank you, Ellen. I'd like to, my name is Edmund Manning. I'd like to talk about Snake as a writer. In his book, Every Story Comes to an End, he talked about me. Maybe this is a little bit about me. He talked about how I didn't want to talk about death. I didn't want to have those conversations. When they would happen, I would get up and leave, he said in his book. It's not entirely true. He was not unwilling to talk about death. It's just the conversation always came around to his death. And I didn't want to talk about Snake's death. I didn't want to face the loss of my friend and think about him not being in the world. I didn't want to think about today and this day and saying goodbye. That was my resistance. Because now, he really is gone. But is he? Is a writer ever really gone? Yeah, I mean, yes. He's gone in some ways. He can't leave zombie statues in his backyard or hang pictures in his house anymore. But he left parts of himself behind writing. And writers do leave parts of themselves, sometimes big pieces, sometimes transparent and translucent pieces, so we see who they really are, sometimes just glimpses. The irony is, in the hands of a really skilled writer, you forget about the storyteller. You forget about the story. You're wrapped up in the story. In his piece, Frozen Lake, he talks about sneaking out of the house and a bunch of boys going ice skating at night. And in listening and reading that piece, I can try to imagine ice blades on one of the lakes nearby, cutting through a virgin lake and a ton of snow, a foot of snow on top. He puts me there. He helps me experience this with him. The loneliness of being on a dark lake and skating around. The joy of hearing your friends laugh and fall not far away. Somehow he was able to manage to capture it all. That piece ends with the sentence, "I find my soul wandering joyfully out on the ice." I think that's a beautiful way to end. Another piece of his I really enjoyed was titled Sleep. About all the times in life a person can fall asleep and all the things that can put us to sleep. Television, monotony, working every day, all the opportunities to fall asleep. He ends that piece in a particularly beautiful way. He says, "Death came knocking on my door. He sat in a chair across from my bed and offered his services, explaining, 'No hurry. When you're ready, I have the key.' 'What key?' asked Snake. I asked. Snake's voice. 'The key to the gate. I'd be glad to walk you there,' Death replied. 'What gate?' I asked. And that does sound like Snake. Like just pursuing a conversation with Death into annoyance. 'Hush,' said Death. 'Sleep. Just go to sleep.' So I like to imagine Snake has that key now. He's finally badgered Death into handing it over. I'm sure all of you have your own favorite stories. I found the first time I read his books, it was important to read them in a linear fashion. As the author constructed and put them together, I wanted to respect that. And then after that, since then, I take a much different approach. Kind of a magic 8-ball approach, where if you just take his books and just shake them for a minute to just kind of loosen up the words, and then find the story that I need to read in his voice by flipping the page open. That's the story that I need to read in that moment to connect to him. And many of them begin with, "I once knew a guy." So we get to see a lot of familiar faces and friends, some of whom are in this audience. And if you haven't read all of Snake's stories, well, then I'm jealous of you. You still get a new time to sit with him, to sit by his side. You have a fireside chat ahead with you, with someone wonderful, someone you already know, someone whose voice you're going to hear in your head as you read the words. A pleasure that is not likely to be repeated. One of his reviews online said, "This is a personal, raw, transformational journey through one of humanity's most avoided topics, talking about the end. This man can, from my observation, look into a man's eyes, reach out his hand, and pull the man's soul out for him to look at." Another online observation. When I bought copies of Snake's books, I bought extra copies and asked him to sign them for people I had not met, so I could give copies to friends in the future, and they would be signed. In the book, Every Story Comes to an End, Snake's to sign those books with "Endings Matter," and then the Snake swiggle. Best author signature ever. And I agree. Endings matter. So I'd like to take a minute to read the last story in his book, Every Story Comes to an End. It's called Bears Play Poker. Northern Minnesota, where 1,700 square miles of wilderness are sprinkled with cold blue lakes, granite boulders, pine poplar, and tamarack. Loons call across the lake at dusk, and owls glide silently through the dark forest. Hidden from view, bears play poker with wolves under a canopy of stars. Seeking the company of honest men, 20 of us circled up under the stars for a week, ages 57 to 76. When men pass the age of 50, fighting the corrosion of ego becomes a futile exercise. We accept that life rusts a man and thins his armor. Soul is found right under the surface. As we stumble across rocks and roots on unreliable feet, hands reach out to steady us. When water is too heavy for one man to carry, another pair of hands appear. And when a word is too faint to hear, we shout at one another. The years grow a willingness to watch out for one another. The camp ritual of chopping wood and carrying water hasn't changed, but the tenderness and companionship between men has matured. We know love. 25 years ago, we brought our boys to Fall Lake, but our sons are now grown men with children of their own. I appreciate the man and father my son has become. Yet I miss the curious boy who once wandered the woods besides me. Two old men go for a swim, both over 70 and friends for 30 years. They held hands and shuffled into the lake on tender feet. Bare butt naked and drooping in all the usual places. I feel like some people didn't hear that. Bare butt naked and drooping in all the usual places. They threaded a cautious path between the slippery boulders and paused. Crotch deep and grinning like fools, they leaned forward stiff-legged. Pale old trees splashed under the dark surface, only to surface moments later, sputtering like 12-year-olds. Between sobering conversations regarding what we've learned about life and wet old men laughing in a lake, I saw beauty. I grow melancholic when my time in the woods comes to an end. Northern Minnesota, sprinkled with cold blue lakes, granite boulders, pine poplar and tamarack. Loons call across the lake at dusk, and owls glide silently through the dark forest. Hidden from view, bears play poker with wolves under a canopy of stars. We just had a question from the audience. Are these books available for sale online? It turns out they are available for sale. Well, any number of bookstores, but you might consult Amazon.com, for example. One thing that every writer loves, deceased or alive, is reviews. So please feel free to leave one of those too.
Good day. I'm Randall Rogers, and met Snake 15 years ago. And it took me a while to warm up to him. He liked to flaunt his Norwegianness. We connected in all kinds of ways, but the most profound was as artists. And I have a real love-hate relationship with the idea of being an artist. We had many conversations about that. There are so many invitations about what this might look like today. The place that you're sitting is certainly co-created by Alexis and Snake, but it is an artistic expression that has grown for 20 years. Not just the plants, but if you take a moment and walk through them, you'll see all kinds of surprises. Some of them comical, some of them asinine and profane, but many of them sacred and profound. As I started to think about what an artist is, and again, I wrestle with that. Is it in his eyes? Is it how he sees the world? Being with Snake over a period of time is to know a man whose palate is not limited to oil or pencil or copper, which you'll see an abundance of copper. His palate included humanity. There's a piece he created that had a spike. It was intended to blend the suffering a man might feel with his sexuality or his life, and the parts of himself that he might have to put to death in some way. And he blended that into this thing of beauty that is metaphor and triumph. Was it perhaps his mind? Well, you just heard Edmund say incredible things about the way Snake could thread bits and pieces. Well, he taught crocheting for years at Inglerson's. What a great use of yarn. Boy, could he tell a yarn. Was it his hands? Certainly, as you go around here, it's amazing how many things are formed with his intention and with his hands. I just asked Alexis today, I'm kind of slow. I was using the restroom and there's a framed piece of Egyptian art above the toilet. It's copper. It wasn't only his art, let me just say very clearly. He illuminated other people's art, mine included. But this piece, you'll notice, has a copper mat. I've been here 15 years. Today is the day I decided, oh, I bet Snake did that too. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. In sitting with this man as a creative energy, I've watched him take the very fundamental, most basic things of life, of human struggle, men and women, and make them an artistic expression. While I'm loath to call myself an artist, I would label Snake an artist, where the palette is life. The palette is what is possible. And I think he had the greatest hallmark an artist can have, which is endless and abundant curiosity. How did this work? Why did it work? How can I share it with the world? And that is a gift I believe we all get to share. So recently, we were on a weekend doing men's work, and an example, just a brief example, is that a man had done some deep work and touched a part of himself and a part of his life, a part of his history in a different way. And to secure that moment, Snake went to a tree that was about 6 feet away, a pine tree, grabbed some needles off that pine tree. Imagine them as paint or canvas, and offered them to the man to taste. So I'm going to make an invitation to you all today with this in mind. I've pulled off some pine tree boughs. They're on the table here in a bowl. The idea is anchor this moment, anchor this feeling, anchor the community, the history, the connectedness, and the love of this man and his creativity. And help yourself to a pine needle. It's a bitter taste. It's a sweet taste. It's a memorable taste. And it'll give you something to take home with you, besides the stories and the books and the ideas of this extraordinarily creative, giving human being.
I see something in you. How many of you have heard Snake say that? I see something in you. Oh my God, what does he see? Snake was the most present person I know. I can't count the number of times I was in a conversation with him or present when another man was speaking and Snake would interrupt saying, "What was that?" "What was what?" we would say. "When you were speaking just now, I noticed a catch in your breath, a trace of a tear, or a smirk. You see, you rushed by it." "What?" we would say. "None of your fucking business." But more often than not, he'd have us. And the space would be just safe enough to be willing to be uncomfortable and go there. Or another man would have just modeled a piece of vulnerability that would make us feel too ashamed not to go there. And we all found so much peace, so much comfort, often in this very space. Being able to be seen, to be held, and especially in our brokenness and our shame. The invitation, often provocation, sometimes trick, to get us to be more fully present. And we would find always that we could bring our whole selves and still find connection. Snake believed that the real problems we faced were isolation and unmetabolized stress. He worked to create spaces for both, for connection and for decompression. He thought that PTSD was a natural response to a traumatic stress, but that we needed to find ways to decompress. In the work that we do as a community of men, we live from a place of empowered mission. It's not always easy to figure out what that is. Snake's mission was to share his wisdom. And anyone who knew Snake knows that he was very good at that. Much has been said about his creativity, his storytelling, his amazing friendship. He lived so fully into his mission that he developed a deep, deep pool of experience, which he turned into a deep pool of wisdom that benefited all of us. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours of practice it takes to achieve mastery. Snake spent tens of thousands of hours listening, cajoling, provoking people into sharing their stories. And along the way, he gathered a deep reservoir of knowledge and wisdom that he shared with the rest of us. Sitting in this space the day that he died, we kept hearing from people all over the world. Remember that, Vienna? I kept thinking to myself, what a legacy. How many lives did he touch? And how lucky are we to have been around him? One of the interesting things that Snake occasionally shared was his shadow mission. He loved to use his knowledge to torture us all for his own pleasure. I appreciate two things about that. The first is that he owned it. He was pretty upfront about it. And the other is that he gave the shadow a constructive job. It's like the Hebrew concept of Yetzer Hara, evil inclination. The idea is that we cannot banish this and we shouldn't try. If we do, it comes outside of us. Better to put it to work, keep it in front of us, and it often came through in his playfulness. Alexis asked me to speak about Snake's mentorship. He was more than a mentor. He was a teacher, a guide, a spiritual leader, and occasionally a tormentor. Snake told me more than once that he regretted not being more of a mentor, that he and many of the men of his generation had not done more to cultivate the next generation of leaders. We met him at a time when there was a void there. And he said that they were having so much fun exploring and doing the work, they really didn't think that much about the void that was going to become apparent. Early in our friendship, we'd sit in the garage and eat watermelons, spitting the seeds in the driveway. I told him that I felt both inspired by what I was learning and called to learn more, and also to make a place for men who felt similarly. And there weren't enough places at that moment. I told him that this might be the right time for him to finish the job of creating the next generation of leaders. And I was blessed to help and to do that with him. For 5 years, we held circles, we created weekend experiences at the lake, we held trainings. We asked men to make commitments to one another for a time, and we invited experienced men who've been on the sidelines to join us. A lot of you are here. Many did. And it's a marvel how many men's lives are being touched by this and how this community has really been rekindled. We've learned that we can be the change that we're seeking. We've learned to create sacred spaces, to create rituals to commemorate important moments, to be present to one another, to live fully, to give and receive blessings, and to grieve, and to know that the depth of our grief is a measure of the depth of the love that we have lost. To feel that sadness is to honor the loss, and we know that it's not going to kill us. Snake helped me to realize that I was living my empowered mission, which is to nurture healthy community through hospitality and authentic connection. And as the whole community of leaders appeared, we're all here today. Let's bless Snake and honor him by continuing.
So I'm going to kind of keep it short. As a husband, we had been running into each other since we were 15 years old. I used to be a waitress at Bernie's Delicatessen in St. Louis Park, and evidently Snake would, after he would eat at Julie's house, would go with his friend Jerry to Bernie's every night and eat a second dinner, which there means no way I did not wait on him during when I was 15. When I owned my first car, my first husband required I learn to rebuild the engine. I did, and it ran, but I used the community. There was a co-op community garage, which Snake also spent a lot of time at as well. We raised our kids 3 blocks away maybe, and I would see him occasionally, as Anna would describe him, with his long hair, and I kind of had the same impression that you described, like, who the fuck is that? And then, you know, I was 47 and he was 49, and Alan and his then girlfriend Christy actually suggested we get together, and we both bluntly said no way. And we kept running into each other. He wouldn't go away. And the next thing I knew, 9 months later, we were married. And we made a commitment to each other. We took marriage really seriously. We going through marriage and having been married, we knew the ups and downs and the difficulties that go with marriage, and we knew how important it was for us to commit to each other in that way. And I did promise him he would die at home, and God damn it, he did. And there's no way he was not. I swear a lot. I do have a sailor's mouth, whoever doesn't know me. We had something special. We had, every morning for 23 years, he would bring me coffee, and we would sit for an hour and a half to 2 hours and talk about our lives, our days. Although some of you I've never met, I know all of you. And I know your stories, and he knows all of my friends that are part of my world, and my clients, and everyone. And even when the only time he actually didn't is the first time he had cancer, but the second time, during chemo, during the transplant, and even after he actually came home from the hospital and been diagnosed with brain cancer, the first 2 days, he'd walk up with 2 cups of coffee upstairs, and I can show you the coffee all the way up, and bring coffee. And then I started running downstairs to beat him. It was getting a little dangerous. But his commitment to me and my commitment to him, I miss him, and I love him, and he loved all of you. And what I do know about him is the reason you're all here is because you all felt heard by him and witnessed, and you felt important. And so everyone has a special relationship because he really heard you and really loved all of you. And sometimes I really get pissed off sharing him. He's mine. But it's amazing the love he has created with so many people. And that's it, folks. And I'm so grateful we've created this house for us as a home and actually for community. We have done 2 weddings here. We have done many birthday parties of friends and family and had many circles and you name it. And this is wonderful, and it's a great way to acknowledge Snake and celebrate his life. So thank you for coming. And there's Chow. Who's inside, people? And beverages are in the garage.
Could you just sit for a second? I'd like to take a couple of photos from this angle. Thank you.
Thank you.